Creative Assembly are best known for their PC turn-based strategy games, the Total War series. Spartan Total Warrior was their first venture into the console space, which didn't see you commanding thousands of soldiers. It's essentially a hack and slash, very much in the vein of God of War. Your character is armed with the ability to block, guard break, attack, and use bows and arrows, with each stage offering up a new objective other than just to slaughter everything in sight, such as rescue missions or locating specific items that help break up what could easily become quite stale. At your disposal is several weapons that you can switch on the fly. You begin with a simple sword and shield, then throughout the game you'll acquire a wide range of weaponry to use, such as twin blades, an upgraded version of your sword and shield, a hammer, and finally a spear. Each weapon has its own attributes, such as being slow but strong, as well as a magic ability which you can release upon filling up the magic icon below your life bar. For example, your sword and shield have the ability to turn every opponent into stone, while you have a free pass to hack and break them into pieces. Mixing and utilizing all of the magical abilities of each really helps even the odds as well, and believe me, you'll need it. The combat can get pretty hectic rather fast, resulting in a lot of trial and error, but once you get the hang of it, it flows like butter. Beside the regular story mode, there is an arena challenge mode where the Spartan is pitted against many enemies at once. The higher the level, the more the enemies. Throughout the story mode, you can find secrets, which will unlock special armor, weapons, and such for the arena challenge, which adds a nice touch of replayability to the game. On the whole, Spartan Total Warrior is a challenging but rewarding game that will likely satisfy those who enjoy the genre. The Bouncer is essentially a beat-em-up with several RPG elements thrown in. It all revolves around three characters known as Fate, Shion, and Vault as they set out to rescue one of their friends who have been kidnapped by a shady corporation. Now, the story is about as generic as you can get, but where the Bouncer redeems itself is during play. As with most beat-em-ups, you have a selection of moves as well as several special attacks that make dealing with enemies all the more enjoyable. But what helps the Bouncer even further is the inclusion of something known as Bouncer Points, or BP for short, and this is where the RPG mechanics come to the forefront. Throughout your playtime, you'll receive these points depending on how well you performed in battle, and once you've earned them, you can use it to increase one of three stats: life, power, or defense. What makes it even more interesting is that you can also use BP to buy new, more powerful moves for your fighter, and there are a ton to unlock for those willing to put in the time to do so. What steals the show though has to be the replay value that the Bouncer packs in. Sure, it'll likely take you about 20 minutes to get through the game once, but you can restart from the beginning with all of your upgrades that you've earned, and then further build upon them with subsequent playthroughs. It is actually a good thing that Square made this game short and sweet, because it will take at least 3 playthroughs in order to see everyone's scenes, as well as 5 playthroughs to see every single ending the game has to offer. If you're on the lookout for something easy to pick up and play, the Bouncer is a solid option. When it comes to first-person shooters, the PlayStation 2 was home to a wide range of experiences, but one that doesn't often get talked about today has to be Delta Force. It's an intense, first-person tactical shooter that sees the player being in command of a squad as they make their way through the war-torn landscapes of Somalia. Now, the game is based on true events that took place during the 90s, with the missions ranging from silent attacks on radio bases to storming harbours in full force and assaulting hostile-controlled locations from your helicopter. The general gameplay shares much in common with GoldenEye and the early Rainbow Six games, with the controls being very tight, responsive, and easy to operate, aside from having to push L3 to talk to your team, though there aren't too many commands you can give them anyway. Your team will stick with you and cover you, shooting at enemies when they appear, and respond to your commands rather well. A vast arsenal of weapons and upgradable character attributes allows a player to play the game their way, rather than the way the developers want you to. If you like sniping, you can grab a rifle and hide. If you like assault, there's plenty of great up-close and personal weapons at your disposal. Anyone can grab whatever suits their fancy and get right into the action the way they want to. This sense of freedom permeates the entirety of Delta Force, but what makes it even better though is the inclusion of some pretty extensive multiplayer options. And although it can't be enjoyed online anymore, there's still room for couch co-op, which can be played with up to 4 people, and this is where the game really comes into its own. Now, visually, as you can imagine, it's not the greatest spectacle on the PlayStation 2, but it does get the job done and presents a believable take on the events that took place. Even if the game isn't as enjoyable as it once was thanks to the discontinuation of online multiplayer, there's still plenty of fun to be had. In Nightshade, you are Hibana, the deadliest of all female ninjas. She earns her living as an assassin for the Japanese government and eliminates those that would stand in their way. Such a threat is the Nakatomi Corporation, which apart from being formed by Hibana's former mentor and his new disciples, is also the group responsible for allowing creatures from hell into Earth. All of this happens before the actual game starts, so by the time you begin to control Hibana, everything has already gone to crap. The whole of Tokyo is being invaded by the Hellspawn, as well as by an assortment of robots and evil ninjas from the corporation. Hibana is the only one who's been known to hold her own against both of these dangerous groups of enemies, and that's because she's a freaking badass. She has 2 weapons. To begin with, a straight sword and 2 daggers, which are equipped permanently and have no usage restrictions of any kind. When not in close quarters, Hibana can reach the enemy with throwing knives, which will temporarily stun them. But as deadly as this woman is, combat skills are not all there is to her. She is also a very proficient acrobat. To put it short, when you play Nightshade, you will very rarely touch the ground. Of course, it all begins with the classic double jump, but you can also run on walls and temporarily hang there to pick off enemies. Complementing this is a stealth dash that can get you out of some pretty tense situations, and finally the ability to jump off enemies. That last one might seem trivial at first, but later on it turns out to be the most vital of Hibana's talents. Jumping from one enemy to the next, you will find yourself covering huge distances without necessarily laying your feet on the ground once, with plenty of exploration in all of the levels, many hidden items such as cards and even missions and survival modes to unlock, as well as there being a total of 4 characters you can play as after you unlock them, of course. Some of them also have multiple costumes, which makes going through Nightshade all the more rewarding. If you're a fan of shinobi or ninja games in general, Nightshade is definitely one to check out. Airblade is a futuristic skating game that shares a lot in common with the likes of Dark Summit and Tony Hawk Pro Skater. What helps it stand apart though is the inclusion of a story mode that revolves around a man named Oscar. He smuggles his prototype hoverboard home after the project is shut down, resulting in his former employer kidnapping him and leaving it up to his roommate Ethan, who finds the device to rescue him. Now, much like Dark Summit, you have to complete missions and goals in order to advance while using the tried and true Tony Hawk system. The selling point of this game is that you aren't restricted to the ground anymore, but rather you have a device that is more like a hoverboard from Back to the Future. With this device you can perform wild tricks anywhere, all while floating above the ground. Most of the trick combinations and high scoring movements can be done easily through successful landing and movement of your board. Although the tricks may seem hard to pull off, you'll find that if you have any sort of Tony Hawk experience, then you can use all of the different tricks and the combinations with little or no problem. Scoring is what will get you through to the end, and even unlocking other characters is almost like Jet Set Radio in a way, mainly that you run into them and eventually get to use them yourself. There's plenty of modes to try out, but the most enjoyable has to be the multiplayer, and this is where Airblade begins to shine. There's a nice amount of options on offer that are perfect for a group of friends to enjoy. From standard score attack to the more competitive like ribbon tag, it's bound to keep you busy for quite some time. Although Airblade is more or less a cross of 2 other games, the idea here is to give you a world that doesn't restrict you to gravity or the ground itself. With plenty of tricks and stages as well as secrets that you can unlock throughout the game, there is enough here to keep any extreme sport purist content. Nano Breaker is one of those games that you're either gonna love or absolutely hate. The protagonist is Jake Warren, a super soldier who doubles as a one-man army. The plot is simple. Nanomachines have evolved and helped humanity a great deal, but on one island, the computer controlling the nanomachines malfunctions and chaos ensues. To be fair, the narrative feels like a bit of a missed opportunity with plenty of threads that go nowhere, and on the whole, it just feels quite uninspired. Gameplay on the other hand is Nano Breaker's saving grace. Jake is given a plasma blade before the game is started. The plasma blade is a transforming weapon that could destroy things down to a molecular level. This is where the combat lies. You were given 4 branches of combo sequences that are based on your 4 basic attacks: horizontal, vertical, thrust and juggle. They all lead into different weapon transformations and attacks. As you would expect with a game of this kind, each enemy has their own weaknesses and a certain way to instantly kill them. If they don't die, they will lose limbs and body parts, limiting their abilities. This keeps the combat dynamic and helps the players stay on their toes. In battle, you also spill large amounts of blood oil from these creatures. This is just glorified experience points that grant the player the use of special abilities such as health regeneration, as well as those that affect the amount of damage you both deal and take. Using them to your advantage is a sure surefire way to make your way through unharmed, but they come into play even more when you factor in the boss battles that litter the game. Now unfortunately, Nanobreaker does suffer in one main area, that being the difficulty in controlling the camera during play. It can get quite frustrating at times trying to manage the somewhat cumbersome point of view. If you can look past it though, or get used to its quirks, it does become far more less of an issue. Nanobreaker soon delivers an enjoyable experience that is bound to satisfy those who enjoy hack and slashes. If you've been watching the channel for some time now, you'll likely be aware of my unhealthy obsession with Ridge Racer. Ever since the days of the PlayStation 1, it's been my go-to series for racing. The arcadey, pick-up-and-play nature of the games have always been something that resonates with me, but what many people don't know is that the team behind it had a crack at creating a more realistic racer that shared more in common with Gran Turismo than the series' roots. What makes it rather unique is the inclusion of a story mode that sees the player taking on the role of Rena, an ex-ambulance driver who is introduced to the world of auto racing by a very cagey and renowned crew chief. As you make your way through the story, it's not only racing you have to worry about, but also fending off rivals as well as greedy sponsors as your career grows. Unlike Ridge Racer, which was primarily made up of fictional cars, R-Racing instead relies on real-world manufacturers such as Toyota to Chevy and Dodge, and the gameplay is pretty tight, with each of the cars having a noticeable difference once out on the track. Although it's not as realistic as some other racing sims out there, it does manage to hold its own by introducing some unique mechanics, mainly the RP system, which rewards the player depending on how well they performed in each race. You're able to use these points to acquire new cars, parts and different courses, which help prolong the life of the game and provide a real sense of progression as you make your way through it. Now when it comes to presentation, R-Racing still holds up thanks to a generous amount of detail given to each car, but the most impressive have to be the tracks you'll be racing on. From standard roads to dirt and even drag races, there's plenty of variety when it comes to the locations on offer. Although it never quite reaches the heights of some of the more heavy hitters on the PlayStation 2 like Gran Turismo, R-Racing Evolution is still a respectable racer and is well worth giving a go, especially if you're a fan of the Ridge Racer series like myself. Eternal Ring is a first-person action game that combines fast-paced swordplay with an array of magical abilities. It sees you playing the part of one Kane Morgan as you make your way through a mysterious island filled with blood-hungry monsters and cleverly placed traps. Now let's get one thing out of the way, Eternal Ring does not hold your hand, and there are many cheap deaths waiting for you on the island. In order to survive, you have to constantly pay attention to your surroundings, or suffer the death many careless adventurers before you have. As I mentioned, Kane possesses a sword, with the earlier levels requiring you to run up to monsters and poke them and then run away. The later levels even see you having to sidestep or even circle around the enemy before swinging. The sword is a great companion in the beginning, but later its use becomes less and less useful, instead seeing spells becoming the player's main way of attacking. That doesn't make the sword completely useless, but don't expect it to have that great of an impact as it does at the start. Magic is the bulk of the combat system, and once Kane has access to it, there begins a new quest to create powerful magical rings. Throughout the island, the player will find magical rings scattered around, as well as gems from killing monsters. With these gems and the help of a friend, Kane can fuse the gems into new magic rings to create several different kinds of abilities. There are mainly two types of rings, magic and stone. The magical rings are mostly offensive with some support and healing, whereas the stone rings are used to increase elemental damage, as well as increase resistance to it for yourself. Unlocking all of them is key to overcoming all of the enemies lurking on the island, and when you do, you'll feel pretty unstoppable for anyone who craves the first-person adventures of old. If you didn't get around to it back in the day, there's never been a better time than now to try it out for yourself. War of the Monsters is an excellent example of how to take 50s monster movies and turn them into a destruction simulator. War of the Monsters is all about busting up your opponent and whatever city you happen to be floating around in at the time. Through the selection of different monsters, you'll be able to perform combos, throwing moves, and general mayhem, as well as the ability to use the environment itself to your advantage. With the single player mode, you have the sense of fighting through a story that is truly worthy of the old B-style horror flicks of old. From your standard Godzilla to the ultra snazzy looking robot, you'll find that speed, strength and overall attacking ability is all different with each character, allowing you to have a diverse selection to fight with depending on your skill level. Each character has a certain amount of moves, but you'll find that the battle engine and the overall combat system is very simple to learn and play with. Control itself does take some time to get used to, and you might be a little disorientated when you start battling with the computer, but this is mainly down to the environments being huge, but it doesn't take long until you're slamming enemies into skyscrapers and dominating the field. Apart from single player mode, there is a versus, but it's sort of bare bones. It's still a blast to play, but some more options might have helped. Add in other modes like endurance, and you have a well-rounded package guaranteed to satisfy most players. Now visually, War of the Monsters comes to life thanks to an abundance of incredible character design and visual flair. The further you move into the game, the larger the arenas that you fight in become. Buildings explode and crumble before your eyes, and crowds of screaming people run rampant through the streets away from you, all of which makes for an impressive display. For those of you who are looking to play through a fighting game that has more substance and longer battles than it really does all-out fighting, then you'll find that War of the Monsters is just what you're looking for. Kessen brought a different view of the Romance of the Three Kingdoms saga by adding in plenty of large real-time battles and several likable characters revolving around a well-known political struggle. Through that game, many found that the fact you had to sit by and watch most of the action a bit of a chore, but Kessen 2 on the other hand brings more control to the player while adding in several different aspects that were not seen in the first outing. The story continues and focuses on the General Liu Bai and his love interest who has been stolen by his one-time ally. You'll find that the battles now range on land as well as by sea, and all tell a rather deep and involved story that has characters coming and going as well as defecting from one side to the other depending on the choices that you make. Add in new things like magic spells, player controllable generals, and you have a game that is much more of an improvement over the first. In the battles you have better control over what the generals do, and you can single-handedly turn the battle in your favour with enough attention, or lose it just as quickly if you don't pay any. Kessen 2 offers up to 500 characters on the screen at any given time, and you'll find that the different magical attacks that you have are also very well done and visually impressive to boot. Kessen 2 is an improvement over the first in terms of easier to use control, tutorials, visuals and sound. If you're looking for something to satisfy that strategy itch, Kessen 2 has got it by the bucket load. Well, that does it for today's video. Keep an eye out for part 2 as that will be coming up soon, so don't forget to hit subscribe and hit that bell to get notified. You can follow me on all of the socials to stay up to date, as well as join our growing community on Discord to meet many like-minded gamers to continue the conversation with. I'd like to give a special shout out to our Patreon supporters Rhino, Skill Jim, Nano, Steve, Richard, Amy, Daniel, Quinn, Dio and Paddy J for their continued support that helps make these videos possible. If you're interested in joining my Discord or supporting the channel through Patreon, you'll find the links in the description. As always, thanks for taking the time to watch the video. I'll catch you next time.